Inflation. Let us start with an exercise. After 2 years, your boss gives you a 5% pay raise. Are you 5% richer? Discuss why or why not. Answer. The answer will depend on what has happened to the price of goods and services in your country during that time. If they've gone up by more than 5%, you will be poorer. If they've gone up by less than 5%, you'll be richer by the difference between your raise and the inflation rate. So your real increase can be calculated by taking your nominal increase and subtracting the rate of inflation. Exercise. Discuss how you would measure the change of prices in a country. What problems would you face trying to measure these prices? How could you solve these problems? What weaknesses would remain? Possible answers. Prices are different in every shop and at different times. Price searches must be frequent and then averaged. Some goods are more important to the lives of people than others. For example, a 100% increase in the price of grapes will hurt people less than a 100% increase in the price of housing. How do we account for the increased importance of certain types of goods? By giving them an increased weighting. So it forms a higher percentage of the final inflation number if it is more important, like housing, for example. Who decides what this weighting is? The government does. So the inflation number will probably not represent the actual increase costs to you unless you spend your money exactly as the government thinks that you do. For example, this is a graph showing Malaysia's consumer price index weightings, and that's how they measure the inflation rate. They take a basket of goods, weight each good at a certain percentage, and add up the weighted sum of each of those goods, and compare the price from one year to the next. Any increase in this basket of goods between one year and the next would be considered as inflation, and that comparison will be done as a percentage, and you get your percentage inflation rate. So in Malaysia, 42% of the consumer price index is housing. So it is the highest weighted good. Transportation represents 17.4% of Malaysia's consumer price index, and 15% goes for food and beverages. There is then 6%, almost 6% on medical care and on education. And then we have various others for the rest of Malaysia's consumer price index. Defining price level and inflation. Price level, a measure of the average prices of goods and services in the economy. Inflation rate, the percentage increase in the price level from one year to the next. General terms, an increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy is called inflation. When there is a general rise in the price of goods and services, this causes the purchasing power of consumers to decrease. Inflation happens when most prices rise in an economy. The level or rate of inflation for consumers is calculated using a representative basket of goods for consumers in the economy. This is known as the Consumer Price Index, and it measures changes in the prices of goods in the basket over time. And we can see this graphic representation of another Consumer Price Index, this time with a 32% rating for housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels, and a 17% rating on transportation. Why is it important? Since the Consumer Price Index only measures consumer goods, it is only useful for consumer applications. Wages should be indexed by Consumer Price Index because what we care about is allowing people to purchase the same basket of goods. Likewise, for any cost of living adjustment, one example of cost of living adjustment is with pensions. The cost of living adjustment was instituted to keep benefits at a constant level of purchasing power over time. So when you're drawing your pension, if you have a fixed cash level, it means that your purchasing power will likely decrease over time, as there will likely be inflation, meaning that the cost of things you need to buy will likely go up over the course of your retirement. Limitations of the CPI as a measure of inflation. Few households are average. The published figures for inflation is rarely the actual rate of inflation experienced by different people. This is due to the following reasons. The CPI is not fully representative. It will be inaccurate for non-typical households. For example, 14% of the CPI index is devoted to motoring costs. However, this is inapplicable for a family that does not own a car. Spending patterns. For example, single people have different spending patterns from households that have one or more children. 2. Although the price of a good or a service may rise, this may also be accompanied by improvements in quality or performance of the product. 3. The CPI is slow to respond to new products and services. The CPI basket is changed each year, but only a few items fall out and come in each year. Falling inflation does not mean falling prices. Remember that a fall in the rate of inflation is not the same thing as a fall in prices. In 2009, there was a drop in inflation from 5% to 1% over the course of the year. Inflation was falling, but the rate remained positive, meaning that prices were rising, but at a slower rate. A slowdown in inflation is not the same as deflation. Deflation would be if there was a negative inflation rate or if the prices were falling from year to year for your basket of goods as defined by the Consumer Price Index. For this to happen, the annual rate of price inflation would have to be negative. So we call negative inflation deflation. What's causing inflation? Contributions to Consumer Price Index inflation in the UK. And we can see each contribution broken down by sector. If we look at the years from 2014 to 2015, we can see there was actually a negative contribution from the electricity, gas and fuel sector. And because food requires a lot of energy as an input, it also meant that food prices were dropping during that period. But that doesn't mean that overall inflation was negative or that there was deflation. It depends on the weighting of the basket of goods. So we can see that housing continued to increase in price during that period. So for all of these periods, the cost of housing increased, as did the cost of education and transport. Measuring the rate of inflation. One of the most common ways to measure inflation is through percentage change in the Consumer Price Index from one year to another. Price Index. The cost of today's market basket of goods expressed as a percentage of the cost of the same market basket during a base year. Market basket is a representative bundle of goods and services. So this would be a weighted index where some goods and services are weighted higher than others. Base year, the point of reference for comparison of prices in other years. So the price index is defined as being the cost today of your market basket divided by the cost of the market basket in the base year, multiplied by 100 to turn it into a percentage. Example, calculating a price index for a two-good market basket. So that is a basket that is only made up of two goods. These goods are corn and computers. And your market basket is defined as being 100 bushels of corn and 2 computers. The unit price is $4 for a bushel of corn and $500 for a computer. That makes the cost of the market basket in 1999, which is going to be taken as our base year, to be $400 for the 100 bushels at $4 each, plus $1,000 for the 2 computers at $500 each. So our market basket in 1999 cost $1,400. In the year 2009, the bushel of corn had doubled in price up to $8 per bushel, but the cost of computers actually decreased to $425 per computer. So if we calculate the cost of our market basket in 2009, it's $800 for our 100 bushels at $8 each, plus $850 for our 2 computers at $425 each, giving us a total cost of $1,650. So we can see for our basket, even though one of the items increased in price and one of them decreased in price, overall the basket increased in price between the year 1999 and 2009. But what was the price index? So the price index is the cost of the market basket in 2009 divided by the cost of the market basket in the base year, which we said was 1999, multiplied by 100 to give us a percentage. And if we plug in the numbers there, we get 117.86. So that is to tell us that it is 17.8% higher in cost in the year 2009 than it was in the year 1999. So what was the level of inflation, the percentage increase in prices from 1999 to 2009? So it's 17.8%. Okay, here's how we calculate that. We take the new price, subtract the old price, and multiply by 100. So the new price was 117.78. In this case, we can use the prices, but in this case, we're actually using the price index. Yeah? Minus 100 on our base year. So the base year had a price index of 100, divided by 100, multiplied by 100 to get a percentage. And as I mentioned before, it was 17.86%. Exercise, calculating inflation. Imagine a country where there are only 3 goods: popcorn, movie shows, and diet drinks. The following table shows the prices and quantities produced of these goods in 2000, 2015, and 2016. Okay, so you'll need to refer to this table. The government has decided that the normal level of consumption for the average family is 5 popcorn, 3 movie shows, and 3 diet drinks. Calculate the consumer price index for 2000 if 2000 is the base year. So the consumer price index for 2000 will be 100. And that just follows from the definition of consumer price index. It's going to be the cost of buying the market bundle in that year divided by the cost of buying the market bundle in the base year. So because we're looking at the base year, that will work out to be the same number divided by the same number, giving us 1, multiplied by 100. Okay, so the consumer price index for the base year will always be 100. Calculating the CPI and the percentage change in the CPI for 2015 and 2016. So here we have the figures for what each of these items costs in the years 2015 and 2016. And we just use the same formula, but this time we put in the cost of buying the bundle in 2015 and then the cost of buying the bundle in 2016. And here, to separate out between the different consumer price indexes or indices for the different years, we use a subscript here of the last 2 digits of the year. So that's CPI for 2015, and this is CPI for 2016. And if we work out the figures, we get that in 2015, the CPI is 169.2. And in 2016, the CPI is 176.5. Okay, so what did you do? You put in the quantity multiplied by the price, and then the quantity of the next item multiplied by the price, and then added the quantity of the next item multiplied by the price of that item. And all divided by the same calculation using the base year prices. So this, and this are the base year prices. Exercise, calculating inflation. Using the CPI you calculated earlier, calculate the rate of inflation from 2015 to 2016. So we've calculated the CPI for 2015, we've calculated the CPI for 2016. We take those figures, take the larger one, subtract the smaller one, and divide by the smaller one. Or take the 2016 figure, subtract the 2015 figure, and divide by the 2015 figure. Then multiply by 100 to get a percentage, and we get a rate of inflation of 4.3% per annum. So every year, or specifically in the year going from 2015 to 2016, prices of our bundle have increased by 4.3%. Exercise 2, changing the base year. Now compute the CPI for each of the 3 years using 2015 as the base year instead of 2000, but using the same market bundle. So the calculation would be done by taking the cost of buying the bundle in the specific year and then dividing it by the cost of buying that same bundle in the base year. But this time the base year is 2015. So we get these 3 formulas for the CPI in 2000, in 2015, and in 2016. And if we're looking at a CPI in the base year, we will expect it to always work out to be equal to 100. So that is a little bit of a sanity check for you when you're doing your calculations. If the base year doesn't work out to be a CPI of 100, you're doing something wrong. And you're going to be using all the figures from this table here. So the answers. The CPI for the year 2000 will work out to be a number that is less than 100. And that's because the prices have been increasing between 2000 and 2015. So if we use 2015 as the base year, prices look cheaper in the year 2000. So we'll end up with a CPI which is less than 100. So I'll just put in a little bit of a less than 100 symbol here, because that's our sanity check. If prices have increased from this year to the base year, we would expect a value which is less than 100. During the base year, we get a value which is 100. So that checks our sanity check that we mentioned on the previous slide. And in the year 2016, we get a CPI of 104.3. Okay? And if we want to work out what is the rate of inflation between the years 2015 and 2016, it's just going to be the amount that this exceeds 100, or 4.3% is going to be the rate of inflation for the year 2016. Exercise 2. Calculate the inflation rate. What was the rate of inflation from 2015 to 2016? Using the CPI you calculated with the new base year of 2015, is it the same as when you calculated it using the old base year of 2000? So the answer, we do the same calculation. We take the CPI for the year 2016, subtract the CPI for the year 2015, and this time divide it by the year 2015. And we get the number 4.3%, as we mentioned on the previous slide. This is the same inflation rate we calculated using 2000 as the baseline, the base year. The percentage increase in prices for a certain bundle of goods between any 2 years should not depend on the base year chosen for our index, okay? Because it's just the percentage increase in prices between 2 years. So the base year does not affect the inflation rate. It is chosen only for convenience. So usually it's a way of comparing later years to some year in the past. If something cost $100 in the base year and the CPI was 120 in some other year, that thing might cost 120 in the other year. Now really that would only be the case for the bundle of goods defined in the CPI, but that's how we can use these CPI values to get a good understanding of how much prices have changed between the base year and the particular year for which the CPI is specified. Why change the basket of goods? Why might we want to change the bundle of goods used to calculate the CPI? Consider movie shows which have experienced a price increase. Consumers respond to this price increase by consuming fewer movies. This is called the substitution effect. As a result, inflation measured by the new market bundle, the one with fewer movies, is lower than inflation measured by the old market bundle. In other words, the original CPI would overstate inflation by not accounting for the substitution effect. Many economists believe that the standard CPI used by the government similarly overstates inflation by not sufficiently accounting for the substitution effect. Bahrain's one-year inflation rate. So here we're given a graph showing Bahrain's inflation rate. And the first date that we're given here is January 2016. And if it's an inflation rate, it should be comparing the prices of the bundle between this year, this month of this year, and a 1 year earlier, so January 2015. Okay, and we can see that it's coming out over 2%, but under 2.5%. And the inflation rate has gone up since then, leveled off, and then dropped with a brief increase again, and then dropped quite a lot in 2017, where it ended up below 0.5%. Bahrain's 10-year inflation rate. We can see again this period of negative inflation here around 2011. Okay, that's known as deflation. Prices were actually decreasing, or at least the prices of our bundle of goods. Okay, generally inflation has stayed between about 5% and negative 2%. So it's been kept within a reasonable range here. Review. Aggregate total supply and demand. Quantity supplied, the total amount of a particular good or service that sellers are willing to produce at a given price level. Aggregate supply, the total amount of all goods and services produced by an economy at a given price level. Aggregate demand, the total demand by households, businesses, government, and foreign buyers. Inflation can result from a decrease in the aggregate supply of goods and services in the economy. That's known as cost push inflation. Or it can be caused by an increase in the aggregate demand for goods and services. This is known as demand pull inflation. What causes a decrease in aggregate supply? A decrease in production due to a general increase in the cost of production. The increased cost of production comes from increases in the cost of any one of the factors of production. When firms are already running at full capacity, producing as much as they can. This includes any natural resources used in production, for example, oil or water or forests for wood. The cost of rental of machinery could go up, or old machinery might need to be replaced. The rent for land or buildings could increase, or the price of raw materials could go up. Workers might demand higher salaries and wages. Because firms are already running at full production, higher production costs cannot be absorbed by increases in production. Instead, the firms pass these higher costs on to consumers through price increases. This causes the general price of goods and services to go up. What happens with cost push inflation? Aggregate supply decreases, so the aggregate supply curve moves inwards and to the left. So on this graph you can see it as a movement from the AS curve to the AS2 curve. This happens because producers cannot absorb the increased costs of production. Instead, they transfer or push these costs onto the consumers in increased prices. They must do this to maintain profit margins when they are already producing at full capacity. The general price level rises. As the price level rises and people's incomes remain constant, the amount of their real income decreases. What causes an increase in aggregate demand? An increase in demand from these sources, a decrease in taxes or an increase in the minimum wage give households more disposable income. So they demand more of all goods and services. Business demand for goods and services increases. The value of local currency goes down, so the country's goods and services become less expensive to foreign buyers, and these buyers want to buy more. The government wants to buy more local goods and services. What is pull in demand pull inflation? The economy is already producing goods at full capacity. We need more goods and services right now. How increased aggregate demand causes inflation? Demand pull inflation happens because it is generally true that aggregate demand can increase more quickly than aggregate supply. In the short run, producers would have to meet the extra demand by paying the current workers more money to work longer and by investing in additional equipment. So we have a change in the aggregate demand from this curve up to this curve here. And this leads to an increase in the short run actual real GDP above the long run potential GDP. In order to maintain current profit levels, the firm would pass on the higher costs of production to consumers through increased prices, and this would contribute to inflation. Conclusion: increased inflation can be caused by decreased aggregate supply because of increased input costs, or increased aggregate demand due to increased spending by government, businesses, households, and foreign buyers. Since there are different reasons why inflation can occur in an economy, it is important to consider all possible sources of rising prices in order to try to stop inflation. Controlling inflation is an essential part of maintaining a healthy economy, because increases in the general level of prices will result in a loss of purchasing power for consumers, which will have a negative effect on the entire economy.